If you've stood on any corner of Michigan and Wacker, you've stepped inside the old Fort Dearborn. It was a small military post on an island where the Chicago River met Lake Michigan.
Embedded in the pavement at the intersection of Michigan and Wacker, where the fort stood, are bronze strips, and they outline the footprint of the fort.
And there are other reminders of Fort Dearborn here. A landmark plaque, a skyscraper entrance, and sculptures on all 4 Michigan Avenue bridge houses.
All historical events occur somewhere. So when we look at where they happened, they can connect with history and understand the places that are around them.
It's hard to believe that 200 years ago, this was frontier country, marked only by the fort and a few homes owned by fur traders named Kinsey and Wilmette.
Right, I mean, that's another piece of this.
Ann Durkin Keating has studied Chicago history for 30 years. She was co-editor of the Encyclopedia of Chicago, and she's just released this book on the Battle of Fort Dearborn, rising up from Indian country. The first page describes the events following this handwritten order to evacuate the fort despite numerous warnings of an imminent attack by natives.
On August 15, 1812, Captain Heald led the evacuation of 56 U.S. soldiers, 12 militia members, 9 women, and 18 children south along Lake Michigan from Fort Dearborn to Fort Wayne. They all came under attack by 500 Potawatomi warriors a mile and a half from the fort.
The battle took place here at what is now roughly 18th Street and Prairie, in the shadow of Soldier Field. 52 of 95 people died, including 15 Native Americans. Survivors were taken prisoner. And the next day, Potawatomis burned Fort Dearborn to the ground. It was a classic example of winning the battle, but losing the war.
Despite that win, the end of the war really brings a change, and that change is the notion that we're moving away from Indian country and into an American era.
She says the word massacre was used before people knew how many survived.
When Americans kill, it's a battle. When Indians kill, it's a massacre.
She says it was also a way of rallying American support for fighting Indians.
I just don't think that it's appropriate for those of us 200 years later, particularly for those of us in history, to be using a word that loaded.
Keating is sharing what she's learned about Chicago culture clashes in the Battle of Fort Dearborn with other educators from across the country through classes at the Newberry Library.
What really makes American history unique is the frontier.
She says these teachers can now inject Native American perspective into their own American history lessons. The Chicago History Museum has a permanent exhibit on Fort Dearborn, complete with oak planks from a guard tower at Fort Dearborn No. 2, built in 1816. It also provides a glimpse of life inside the fort's walls.
There was a tragic outcome to that day, but that was the coming together of people of a multitude of cultures. And together we have forged this community that has international importance, and we continue to learn how to interact with each other.
200th anniversary of the Battle of Fort Dearborn here in Chicago. The event was commemorated at the spot where Fort Dearborn once stood, at what's now Michigan and Wacker. Fort Dearborn stood at that spot for 9 years, from 1803 through 1812. Almost 100 people tried to evacuate to safety to Fort Wayne, Indiana, but never made it during the battle with Native Americans. Those marking the event today also walked about 2 miles south to 18th and Calumet, where that battle took place.